Hello, my name is Diem. This presentation will explore the impact of urbanization on month-to-month changes in stream flow in the Atlanta area. A little bit of background before I get into that. Information about what makes an urban watershed interesting. Now, urbanization impacts watersheds with temperate climates in places that are not super cold or not deserts, etc., that get a decent amount of rainfall. The impact that urbanization has on these watersheds is it increases impervious cover, so that increases runoff. Since trees are taken away, there's decreased evapotranspiration. There's leaking water supply pipes. Roughly 30% of the water is lost through leaks in those pipes. There's also the inflow and infiltration of water into sewer pipes, which takes water away from the watershed. And also, urbanization can cause increased rainfall over and downwind of urban areas. This has been studied quite a bit in the Atlanta area. It's been proven to cause an increase in rainfall. Now, what just about everybody knows about urban watersheds is that they tend to have higher and more frequent peak flows, and that's primarily due to the increased impervious cover that you find. Now, what we're less clear about in understanding is the impact of urbanization on baseflows. Baseflows could be decreased due to I&I and decreased infiltration, but then they could also be increased due to lawn irrigation, detention basins, and those leaking water supply pipes. Now, what a lot of people have not really looked at too much is looking at month-to-month changes in stream flow for a variety of watersheds with different land cover characteristics to see what might be causing those month-to-month variations, and then that can kind of get at the influence of, say, impervious cover or I&I or evapotranspiration. So what we do here is we take a lot of gauges for the Atlanta region, and we have detailed land cover information, so we try to figure out what's going on there. And the main thing is the intra-annual variation in the various stream flow variables. Rather than just looking at a season or just a whole year, we look at specific months, in fact, every month of the year. The three main objectives are to examine correlations between land cover and stream flow, assess differences in stream flow between urban and rural watersheds, and finally, just simply to explore the potential for I&I to reduce stream flow. This is just an exploration of the potential. This is not a full-on I&I study. Here's the region, the Atlanta Metropolitan Statistical Area. This is representative of the Piedmont Physiographic Province up here in brown. It's the southern end, but one would think that the results we get from this study would definitely be applicable to other metro areas in the Piedmont because they all have the same basic geology. And that's probably also representative for all temperate regions, so all places that have a decent amount of rainfall, don't have deserts, and don't have really, really cold climates. So 90 watersheds were selected within this region. I'm not going to get into the criteria here, but that's a lot of watersheds, various sizes, different types of land cover within these. And the time period that we looked at was 2013 to 2019, so 7 years of data. The thing that makes these places all very similar, and also with respect to geology and climate, is that they all have basically similar soil water balances. They have a surplus of soil water basically from December to April, then a deficit July to September. Now, the most recent period we have that we examined was 2013 and 2019. That was a little different than what you'd expect. It had a dry October as well. So the soil water surplus season was December to April. The deficit season was July through October. Methods: look at land cover change to see if there really was forced to urban conversion going on. Look at correlations between stream flow variables, 6 variables, and 4 land cover classes. The stream flow variables were maximum daily flow, mean daily flow, median daily flow, and minimum daily flow. Basically, median and min were low flow variables, and then we also had high flow frequency, which was specific to a watershed. There was no cutoff as far as millimeters go, as far as the flow goes, universally. And there was also low flow frequency. So the percentage of the frequency of days below the 10th percentile of flows. So top 10%, high flow, low flow is bottom 10%. And then we also took the 15 land cover classes in the National Land Cover Database and combined them. It was too many. So we had a forest class, a hay pasture class, combined open space and low intensity developed land class, and then finally a combined medium intensity and high intensity developed land cover class. Methods continued, calculated correlations between coefficients of variation of the streamflow variables and land cover variables. These coefficients of variation were calculated from the months, so 12 values used to calculate a CV. We broke the watersheds into different groups. We actually had 2 urban watershed groups, or 2 developed watershed groups, and 2 groups of rural watersheds. So we ended up with 4 groups of watersheds out of the 90 that we began with, and compared the streamflow among those. We also analyzed monthly effluent from wastewater treatment plants, WWTPs, throughout the region. There are quite a few. And they have monthly data that you can easily access from the US EPA. And then finally, we used a method that's really designed for daily flow, but we used it for monthly flow at the Snapfinger sewer shed in the South River watershed to estimate I&I for various watersheds within the South River watershed. I will get into the results from this. I probably don't have time to get into the details of how this was actually done. But it involved figuring out the base sanitary flow, which occurs during dry conditions, and then assuming that all flow above that was due to I&I. So the results. I'll quickly go through this. There was forest to urban conversion. Not a big change there. I mean, that's what you expected, but just to prove it, that we actually did have urbanization going on. So watersheds were being urbanized, but it may not be the urbanization you had in mind. It was not like they were going from forest to asphalt parking lots primarily. It was forest, but it's primarily going to open space and low intensity developed land. So single family residential areas with a decent amount of tree cover and grass cover. So the dominant land cover change was forest being converted to open space and low intensity developed land. Of those 90 watersheds, this is showing you the general coverage of the 4 main land cover classes. And you can see that it's dominated by forest, the green, and open space and low intensity developed lands, the sort of light magenta color. Obviously, Atlanta in the center here, and the urban watersheds are towards the center of the domain. Along the fringe, you find the rural watersheds. The other thing I want to point out here is that there was a fair amount of variation in land coverage among the watersheds, which is good. We want that when we want to do correlation analysis. So here are some of the results of those correlation analyses. Up in the upper left shows the correlation for each month between the maximum stream flow for that month and the amount of land cover, urban, high intensity urban, kind of low intensity urban here, hay pasture is that ugly yellow color, forest is the green. What it's basically showing you is that for all months, there's a really strong positive correlation between developed land and peak stream flow, and a negative correlation between rural land and peak stream flow, which is what you'd expect. Increase impervious cover, increased runoff, increased tide flows. That is not that exciting of a finding. Over here it becomes more exciting because you have that same correlation, the same positive correlations with developed land, negative correlations with rural land in the summertime, but they kind of disappear here in the wintertime. That's interesting. That is related to what's happening down here slightly, in that if you look at median flows, which are basically the upper end of low flows, you find a positive correlation in the wintertime and spring between forest and hay pasture land, and a negative correlation between the developed land. So the forest and hay pasture land has higher flow in the wintertime. In fact, it does in the summertime a little. Actually, it doesn't. I got ahead of myself there. But then the correlations flip in the summertime. Didn't happen with the peak flow, didn't happen too much with the mean flow, but suddenly with the low flows, everything flips around. And then, in fact, the low intensity developed land actually had a significant positive correlation in August with median stream flow. Same thing you see all over here occurs for the minimum flow, not as strong of a correlation in the summertime, but the really thing to point out here is that the flip in correlations, or basically the disappearance in this positive correlation between the rural lands and stream flow in the wintertime, negative correlation between developed lands and stream flow, minimum stream flow in the wintertime, it all disappears in the summertime and it almost flips around. Finally, there's also a strong seasonality to the correlations between land cover and high flow frequency. I'm not going to get into that too much. That is going way beyond at the moment. Now, here's a comparison of these 6 variables among the 4 watershed types. And you can see that for our study period, April was a pretty wet month. So that's why that's jumping up here. But across here, for every month, these urban watersheds had higher Qmax values, higher peak stream flow values. They tend to also have higher mean stream flow values. You can see it really separating in the summertime. In fact, that's one thing we found is that the difference really tends to be exaggerated more in the summertime. If you look at median stream flow, the rural watersheds, the green and the yellow, they are higher than the urban watersheds in the winter, but it kind of disappears in the summertime. Same thing over here with minimum. So you see higher values in the wintertime and spring, disappears in the summertime. So what you can say with this is, well, rural watersheds had higher base flow in the wintertime than urban watersheds, but it disappears in the summertime. And in fact, in the summertime, this sort of low intensity developed land has higher base flow than does the rural watersheds. And this might be due to increased lawn irrigation. There are many, many factors that we could consider, but just first thought it might be lawn irrigation, it might be pipe leakage, etc. One thing that's definitely causing a decrease in base flow for the rural watersheds is increased evapotranspiration. One other thing that we did find on here that might be linked to urbanization, we found slightly higher rainfall totals in late summer for the urban watersheds. So it's possible that that's an urban effect going on there. Here's the coefficient of variation between the land cover types at the top. And what you see is that you find positive coefficients of variation for these rural land cover types. So there's more variability, month-to-month variability in stream flow when you have more rural land use, land cover within a watershed, and you have negative correlation when you have more developed land inside. If you look at the 4 land cover classes down here, you see that for all these variables, the rural watersheds have the higher CV. They have more variability throughout the year. The developed watersheds, the urban watersheds, have less. The star just means that most urbanized watersheds, these have significantly smaller CV values. So the bottom line with this is, development decreases the intra-annual variability of stream flow. And it's occurring for all these variables. Now let's get to wastewater treatment effluent. I have about 5 minutes left. And this is very interesting as it shows you that it's not the same month to month. The amount of water leaving a treatment plant does vary quite a bit throughout the year. And in fact, it's highest in the wintertime, lowest in the late summer. The numbers here are just showing you the percent of the 37 treatment plants actually has significantly lower values, say in October, than the rest of the months. So a large red value means it's a low flow month out of that wastewater treatment plant or plants in general. And so what we can assume is that, well, this is higher up in here because of I&I. And that October, over this time period for the Atlanta region, it was probably the minimum I&I month because it was dry. And I'll get into the exact dryness of it in a few minutes. So there is substantial intra-annual variability in wastewater treatment plant effluent, and that is probably because of intra-annual variability in I&I. So the flow of water into sewer pipes, which then eventually ends up in treatment plants. Now, if we look at the snap finger watershed or sewer shed in the South River watershed, what we can see, and this we have good data for this. We have wastewater treatment plant effluent data for this spot here. We have 3 watersheds here with streamflow variables. Now, if we just look at the effluent from 2013 to 2020, or 2019, I should say, there was October 2016 had the minimum effluent. So we could almost say, let's assume that there was no I&I this month. That means that the difference in effluent between all these months and the value for October 2016 was I&I. So we can assign an I&I value to each month. Now, if you're wondering, really, could it really be minimum? And is that due to lack of I&I? Well, this was a very, very dry month preceded by warm and dry months as well. So I feel pretty confident about that. Here we are summing it up over the 2013 and 2019 period. The blue is the effluent coming out of the pipes, coming out of the treatment plant. You can see it's a minimum in October, maximum in April, or high in April because of that increased rainfall, but the peak month is February, so during the soil water surplus season, and then minimum in October. I&I, the bars, that's just the difference between the flow for the months and that minimum flow in October of 2016. So I&I is peaking, is highest in December, from December to April. No surprise, it's a soil water surplus season, and minimum from July to October, the soil water deficit season. Over to the right, we have the month-to-month changes in median stream flow and minimum stream flow. I have the gray on there for the rural sites. And the orange is the unadjusted 3 watersheds within the snap finger sewer shed. The blue is the adjusted. And what you can see is that if we add I&I water back into the watersheds and have it enter back into the streams, it's going to increase median stream flow, it's going to increase minimum stream flow. And it's possible that it could be the major cause of that decreased stream flow, the median and the minimum, in the wintertime in urban watersheds. It might actually be more important than increased impervious surfaces. So I&I might be the major control of that. So the conclusions, I got about a minute left. So the overarching conclusion is that urbanization reduces the intra-annual variability of a variety of streamflow variables. In this study, we saw 6, with it definitely decreasing for 5 of them, with urban and rural watersheds having different changes in stream flow between the soil water surplus season, December to April, and the soil water deficit season, July to October. One thing I didn't point out was that high flow days for urban watersheds tend to be more evenly distributed throughout the year, which can't be a good thing. That means you'd be expecting floods year-round as you urbanize a watershed, rather than just being confined to the wintertime. Despite the prevalence of impervious surfaces and thus possibly reduced groundwater recharge in urban watersheds, urbanization only causes a reduction in baseflow during the soil water surplus season. So this whole reduction in baseflow might just be confined to winter and early spring. And that reduction in baseflow appears to be caused a lot by I&I. And then finally, the results from this study should definitely be applicable to all metro areas in the Piedmont physiographic province, as well as many metro areas with temperate climates throughout the globe. Thank you.